For all of us who are a caregiver, or a spouse, or a family member of someone who has gone through trauma, failing to set healthy boundaries will result in compassion fatigue and burnout. Or if you are someone who has endured trauma, sometimes it can feel like no one is willing to sacrifice their time and help you. So, how can we have conversations about setting good boundaries that result in healing? We're going to show you how in today's episode of the Reboot Recovery Show. Here we go. Welcome to the Reboot Recovery Show. I'm Evan Owens, your host. We are overcoming trauma together and embracing a brighter future. This is season 2 of the show. Thank you so much for listening. I am joined today by my incredible co-host, Dr. Brooke Keel. She's an amazing doctor, a psychologist, a team member over at Mercy Multiplied. I'm also joined by Adam Davis. He's a nationally known speaker, former police officer. He's also author of several best-selling books, including, what are some of the best? Behind the Badge, on Spiritual Combat, The Peanut Butter and Jelly Revolution, subtitle Why You've Been Eating It Wrong All These Years. These are going to be classic books. I think the Peanut Butter and Jelly one's going to be an instant smash. I'm excited about it.
Yes, it sounds delicious.
Yeah, you all doing good today? Everybody having a good day so far?
Doing great. Love being here. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, Brooke has had 12 cups of coffee, so her answers today, you're going to have to adjust your podcast speed down to the 0.5. She'll be talking so quickly on the podcast. So before we get started, I want to tell our viewers, remember the Reboot Recovery Show, you set the topics based on the questions that you ask. All the topics that we address in this show are based off of questions that we get. And if you'd like to submit a question to the show, you can do that. Email us over at info@rebootrecovery.com, or you can find us at Reboot Recovery on Twitter, as well as on Facebook and the Gram. So you can go any of those places, and we would love to get a question from you. It doesn't have to be super elaborate, but we would love to address it on the show. This issue of boundaries and expectations is one that comes up a lot. It is perhaps something that is at the core of a lot of conflict in many families, and a lot of times in many of the relationships even I have, it's my inability or unwillingness to set good and healthy boundaries for myself and others that leads to a lot of dysfunction and a lot of friction. And so I want to talk today a little bit about how do we have those difficult conversations about good boundaries that both me as a caregiver or as a support person results in health, long-term sustainable health for me, but also if I'm a person that maybe has been wounded, it can be a little isolating. How do you have those conversations with people that's going to enable and in many ways support your long-term healing? So let's just kind of start. Brooke, I'm going to come to you first. Why are boundaries so hard to set with the people that we care about? Why are boundaries? Why are these conversations? Why do they feel so difficult sometimes?
I think usually the number one thing is we have a fear that if we are not completely available in all ways that this person who is struggling thinks they need us to be, that they will not be okay. And so it's this false belief that of kind of control, and really not trusting that someone can actually be healed through boundaries, and that we don't have to chase them down. And so what ends up happening is what all of us have heard is an enabling relationship, right? So this person can't be okay unless I'm doing X, Y, and Z for them. And vice versa. You just kind of become codependent in that place. And so, but usually I think it's just stemmed from fear. You love them. You want good things for them. You want to help them. You feel really bad about what happened. There's sorrow, there's grief, there's all of that. But we kind of decide if I'm not fully available, then something really bad is going to happen to this person.
Yeah. And almost I hear you saying like a dependency. Like I feel that they are dependent upon me in many ways. Adam, what do you think about that? Why are boundaries so hard to set with people that we care about?
It depends on the relationship. If my dad needs me. If you have a parent that's elderly or not elderly, whatever the case, but they need me. They need me. It's they were there for me. It's a sense of I owe this to them. Well, they've been through a lot,
Yeah, like a duty, almost like a duty.
it really is. And, especially if you have somebody, and I know, we'll probably cover it later on, but if you have somebody that has been through traumatic experiences in their past and at any point in their life, uh, especially early on, typically from what I've seen is they turn out to be someone who is what has been classified as a helper, right? They first responder. They're, in some shape or form, they help others, and it's a duty, it's their service. That's how they love, and that's how they give back. So I think it's part of who they are, to be available and to serve, and that's how they love. But at the same time, that love can be more effective if they set the boundaries, and it's probably because they've never known how to have those healthy boundaries, and they've never known how healthy and how good it is to, when you do have those boundaries. But it's hard to do that. Well, they've done a lot for me, or they've been through a lot. So you're looking at it from a perspective of, okay, yes, they have done a lot for me. Yes, they've been through a lot. But in order for me to maintain a healthy relationship with my family and with the people that I care about, I've got to have these boundaries. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to be effective for very long, because they're going to start at some point start taking advantage of your all the time availability and willing to serve. So you get that fatigue. So yeah, I think that's why it's so hard to set boundaries.
Yeah. I love John Dale, who works with me here at the Reboot team. He said it best. He said, Evan, he was talking about his marriage. He said, in my marriage, there was a fine line between support and enablement. And I thought that was a really powerful phrase that he said. And he said, for a long time, I had these expectations of support, and my wife had these expectations of supporting me. He's a combat veteran, right? Wounded. And he had this mindset. And I think they had this unspoken agreement about what that looked like. But at some point it shifted from support to enablement, right? And that's challenging, because I think that when that happens, also one of the things I've seen happen, I think one of the reasons that makes it so difficult to set those expectations, there's a sense, and I think, Brooke, you touched on this, especially in the veteran population, or in the first responder culture, with suicide being a very real threat. There's this sense that if I leave them, suicide becomes a more likely option. And I think sometimes that can almost become a weapon, spoken or unspoken, in the relationship. There's the sense that if I don't meet this self-imposed, or maybe others imposed, set of expectations, that I could do myself harm, and or do the person harm. And in other words, doing myself harm in that process. And so I want to transition a little bit away from the caregiver spouse sort of role, the helper role, into this question: what role does the person who's actually experienced trauma play in allowing healthy boundaries to be set? Because a person who's gone through a really traumatic experience, a lot of times they're not really aware of the needs of those around them, because they're in survival mode, right? I mean, they're just getting by. So there's this idea of, you don't know what I've been through, you don't know how hard this is for me. And so sometimes we can take and we can take and we can take, not because we're being selfish, not because we're looking to hurt, but we can become a taker who doesn't really have the ability to give back. And so therefore we don't really understand why somebody wouldn't. So what role do I play as a person who's endured trauma or experience? What role can I play in this? Adam, what do you think about that? What role, how can I do a better job with that if I'm listening and maybe I'm somebody who has gone through trauma?
I'm gonna speak from personal experience. That's what I know. Yeah. I'm not a clinician. I'm a nerd. I'm a writer. That's what I do. But from my experiences,
and a male model. Don't forget that nerd, writer, male model.
Yes, sock model.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like that in order for me to allow someone else to establish boundaries, there has to be a very strong level of trust, because I've been hurt, or I'm speaking in general. If you have been hurt, if we have been hurt, and I mean real deep trauma, I mean stuff that it takes a long time to get over. Listening to, and I'll keep this really short, listening to a video yesterday from Simon Sinek talking about leadership. Okay. He started off by saying, "Do you love your wife?" And the guy said, "Yes." He said, "Prove it." He said, "When did you start? Give me the specific day you began loving her. When you first met her, you didn't know her. You didn't love her. Love is shown and proven over time." And so allowing boundaries to be set has to be built through trust. Mm-hmm. It takes time. Mm-hmm. It's not something that you come into my life today and say, you need to do this. Mm. There has to be trust. So if I'm going to allow boundaries, it has to be a relational level of trust that I am safe with you and that you're not going to hurt me. You're not going to take advantage of me in any shape, way, or form or fashion. Generosity, compassion, availability. We're going to have those boundaries, and it's mutually understood. And plus, setting my own boundaries, I have to know that, okay, I'm going to set these boundaries so that I can maintain my wellness and my journey of healing, so that I can maintain my efficiency and service and whatever I'm doing in my gifts, and just be a healthy person and be available for my family. But most of all, following the pattern that Jesus has given us, his law, he fulfilled the law, the law of God in the Old Testament. It was fulfilled. So he established the boundaries so that we could run free.
Mm.
Freedom is found within the boundaries. So, but it has to be trust. It has to be trust based. I should have just shut up after that, but there has to be a very strong level of trust.
That was good. Well, I trust you in what you're saying there. I believe that. Brooke? That's
so good. And I think I don't know who said this quote, so I now take credit for it. So just so you know, but
nice. Way to go.
This is pretty much how most of it is.
She's like, I think, therefore I am. I said that. Absolutely, I did.
Was it awesome? Then I said it. No, but I said it, yeah. But there's this quote that I actually use for my own self, right, as I evaluate others, and then how I set boundaries with others is Jesus's yes was never enabling and his no was never crushing. And so I think when we function in between those things, right, it's so good that I said that. No, I just kidding. I'm going to find out who said it because they need credit for it, because that is kind of the litmus test, if you will, that I put when somebody does something. I'm like, well, what's that about? I kind of push it there, and here's the thing, when you've been hurt and somebody sets a boundary, especially if there hasn't been one, it's not comfortable. And we're like, well, wait a second, what is that? And so I think that, and especially if we're in survival mode, but if you have the trust, like you just said, Adam, if this is someone you're in relationship with, then you can pause in that moment and we can activate that frontal lobe a little bit and go, wait a second. If they're setting a boundary and I know that they care about me and I know that they're trying to be good to me, is this maybe a good idea? And I think too, just even the idea of let me consider what they did might be okay. And maybe it's not, right? But you have to at least be able to honor yourself and evaluate why someone would set that boundary. And is there something I need to set it as well? And there's not any pressure in that. I'm just considering it. I'm just looking at it. Yeah. And then what am I comparing it to? And that's why I say that other piece of how Jesus set boundaries, right? And so, yeah, so that's what I think.
No, I think that's good. And I think that so oftentimes the attitude with which we go into these conversations, defensive, guard up versus willing to hear. And if you're a person who's dealt with trauma, let me ask you, when's the last time you asked your caregiver and spouse how they were doing? When's the last time you said, hey, are you hurting? Are you feeling overwhelmed? What do you need right now? When's the last time you asked? Because if you're not asking that question ever so often, nobody else is either. Mm-hmm. Right? And a lot of times it can be very isolating. On the flip side, I think that, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but I think that it can be very difficult sometimes if you are. And I always say the first sign that someone's overcoming trauma is they start to realize that other people than themselves are hurting. Mm-hmm. The second sign is that they want to do something about it. And so I think there's a bit of a chicken and egg phenomenon. Sometimes it takes asking, hey, how are you doing, to realize, okay, wow, the world kept going, because trauma can sometimes make us feel like everything stopped except for our pain. And so sometimes to be able to kind of pull our head out of the turtle's shell, kind of to look around and say, what's going on with you, can be a really life-giving conversation that can set the tone. And to not, when they share their struggles or their boundary issues, to not feel judged by that, to not feel like, oh, well, I'm burning them out. I guess my trauma is just too much for you to handle right now, isn't it?
This podcast is part of the Edify Podcast Network. Edify is a faith-inspiring app that brings together thousands of the best Christian podcasts in one place for your listening enjoyment. Cut through the noise and grow your faith by diving into the world's top Christian podcasts today. Download the Edify app for free from the App Store or Google Play, or by going to edify.app. That's edifi.app.
To not respond aggressively, but to just let them speak, to give them the same treatment that you wish someone would give you, or that you are receiving. And this idea of compassion fatigue and burnout. How does someone know? So first off, let's kind of define those words. I'm going to turn to our resident doctor in the house. How do you define burnout and compassion fatigue? First off, what is it, and how do I recognize? What are some of the signs that maybe I'm dealing with this?
Honestly, I think one of the number one signs of compassion fatigue is that you no longer have compassion. You just kind of get to where you just don't care anymore. And this can be from, like we talk about like people who are nurturers and all of that. So for sure, for those people, right, they're like, I'm just a helper. And I give it, well, when you start not caring how people are doing, that is a problem, right? Or for me, who's a little less nurturing, but when I start not caring about the people I love most, then that's an issue. And so I just think that's kind of the number one thing. And it can come out depending on who you are in a million different ways, right? I'm either going to just try and avoid situations, I'm going to escape them, or I'm going to get really angry, or, whatever kind of our coping mechanism is in that. But I think another piece of it too is that not only do we not really care as much, we then are angry at them for not respecting boundaries that we know we never set. And so, so then offense sets in, bitterness sets in, and then that dictates the rest of the relationship. And so I've even seen this, clinically, these clinicians who have had no boundaries with clients, and then all of a sudden they get offended because a client who just functioned within the boundaries that they set, started going too far. And then they withhold care. And then all of a sudden you've got a really bad, not only ethical situation, but just a bad situation for the person who said, you told me I could call you anytime. You can't now get mad that I am doing the thing that you said I could do. And so I think that that's where we really have to, you can feel it. You can just feel it happen. But I think the number one thing is when you stop caring and stop having compassion, you're probably tired, probably worn out. So
yeah. I think it's interesting in my story, burnout, compassion fatigue is a very big part of my journey. When we first began Reboot, my wife and I, we were, Jenny and I, this is not exaggerating. There was a time when I was leading 2 and 3 Reboot courses per week. I had veterans living with me. I was discipling about 10 or 12 different men at that time in my life. Plus I was running a company with about 40 employees as a CEO of it, as a technology CEO. And when I looked at that time of my life, I didn't have children yet, but it would be very common for me to start work at 7 and not be done until 10 or 11 at night. I would get home and one of the vets living with us would want to talk and process something they were struggling with. And I would do that until midnight and go to bed and repeat. And I did this for about 2 years until the point that actually my reaction, and maybe somebody listening can identify, I actually started to feel physically ill when people would come towards me who felt like they were going to be a clinger, who felt like they were going to be needing something from me. I would actually get physically the need to escape. I would feel like I need to run away. And it was actually like an anxiety feeling, sometimes almost like a feeling of nausea that was very weird for me. But for me, I think learning how to set healthy boundaries, one of the ways I started to do that, just as a free tip to our listeners, is I started to give people homework assignments for my time. So I would say, man, I really appreciate you sharing this story with me. What I'd like you to do is go home and I'd like you to ask your wife these 3 questions, and I want you to email me the answers. Once you've emailed me the answers, then we can talk again. And 8 out of 10 times people never sent me the answers. And so this allowed me to start setting healthy boundaries and realizing I couldn't give more than they were willing to put in. I couldn't care more than they were willing to care. Right. And I think this is an interesting transition. And Adam, I'm going to come to you with this question first, but we got a great question from one of our leaders, one of our members rather, down in Atlanta. He said this. He said, I was in a terrible accident several months ago. My family and I have always been very close, but after the accident, things have changed. I've needed to depend on them to help me heal, and they have helped some. But honestly, I feel like they're just too busy or don't really want to help anymore. I don't want to sound selfish, but on the other hand, they know that I need their help, and it hurts me that they seem to be oblivious. What do you think? So I'll pass it to you, Adam. What do you think? How would you, if Adam comes up to you after one of your speakings or a book signing or something, what do you say to Adam, or to Jason rather?
The first thing I want to say is, how do you know they know you need help? How do you know? Do you just assume that they know? Maybe you have been so strong for so long that they've seen you overcome so many things and you've never asked for help. They just assume He doesn't look like he's struggling. He's got this. Ask them for help and tell them that their presence and them helping you will actually that you need it. That just that you need it. It takes a little bit of vulnerability. It takes a little bit of vulnerability to ask. But if we learn to ask when we need it, then we're communicating what we need and those expectations that, okay, they know. Well, how do they know? How do they know? I mean, if you've actually sat down and talked to them, and then I think that's an entirely different dynamic. But communicate to them that, hey, right now I feel like you guys are oblivious to where I'm at and what I need. That I need help, and I need you to help me through this so I can overcome. So I think communicate what you need.
I love that. Yeah, that's good. Brooke, any thoughts?
No, I think that's perfect. And I think the other side of it is, if you, well, not the other side, but if you do that and then they're like, this is all we can give, well, then at least you know what you're functioning in. I think that really matters. If they're like, look, I can only do this much because of whatever reason it is. And it's okay to be hurt by that they can't give you what you feel like you need. But also I think you have a space to evaluate, okay, I'm just making something up, I'm feeling lonely. And so I need to find a healthy person to help me kind of meet me in that place. And it's not going to be my family, apparently, because now they can only do so much. And so I think evaluating what are the expectations you have for them. And I think that's exactly right. Like sharing, this is what I need. And if they're like, I can't do it, this, or maybe, and I think more often than not, someone's like, oh, I just didn't want to offend you, or I didn't want to impose, or I didn't,
right. Especially they don't want to insult him. They don't want to insult him by doing things for him.
Especially with men. And I will just tell you, as a woman, there is this idea of like, I'm going to make you feel weak if I'm like, can I do anything for you? And I think a lot of people want to honor that, especially if you're a veteran. Like no one would ever want to hurt or offend somebody's position, and so it's like, man, you've gone through so much, and then there's this, or I've had this trauma, and and people don't know what you're dealing with. And so anyway, I think usually the heart is there and the communication is not.
Yeah. And I guess I'll chime in now with my 2 cents on it, I guess. A mentor of mine, Hunter, he always says this. He says, unspoken expectations are pre-planned disappointments. And I found this to be true as a leader of an organization, that when I have unspoken expectations, I'm pre-planning my disappointment when people don't hit them. I've seen it to be true in counseling and ministry. I've seen it to be true in my marriage. I've seen it to be true pretty much everywhere, right? And in my experience, when we have trauma, when we've experienced trauma, we need to find safety. And so we'll look to those closest to us to provide that. We need that soothing, that companionship, that comfort as a way to feel protected, as a way to feel validated. And so we lean on those people and we really expect them to support us in our journey to heal. And when our friends and family are able to provide that level of support and care, we feel, cradled, we feel protected, we feel like we're in the arms of a loving, trusting relationship. We're getting what we need. However, it seems like more often than not, honestly, I found the level of support that we're hoping to receive from our friends is either unrealistic or disproportionate to what they can actually give. So in other words, I have an unspoken expectation with a pre-planned disappointment, because expecting someone to give us something that they are not able to give is pre-planned disappointment. Here's a thought, Jason, for you that I would have. Do you think that maybe it was traumatic for your family to see you go through that accident? Is it possible that maybe they're dealing with their own trauma? Maybe they're trying to process how their life suddenly changed from being able to say, okay, he's an adult, or he's grown, or he's out of the house now, or whatever, to now suddenly they're back in a role where they've had other responsibilities, other things that maybe they dreamed of that now they've had to put on hold while they process and cope with what's happened. You see, trauma is like a atomic bomb. When it goes off, it affects a large radius of people. And yes, you were at the brunt of it in your accident. Absolutely. Tons of grace, tons of no judgment there at all for your needs to feel safe and feel supported. On the flip side, recognizing that those around you also at some level experience trauma as a result of that. And so having a conversation and saying, what are you able to provide? What are you not able to provide? And just saying, I want to have good expectations. I don't want to be disappointed in your level. Let me tell you what I need. And then you tell me what you're able to and not able to provide. Because here's the truth. I'm betting, Jason, you wouldn't be able to articulate exactly what you need. Therefore, your expectations aren't clear. And that's a pre-planned disappointment. And so my advice would be to start with writing out, what are your expectations? What are your actual needs? What do you need most? And then sit down and say, guys, here's what I need. I don't want to be frustrated with you. I know you've encountered this with me, but I need your support in these areas. Can you do that? Can you commit to that? The other thing, Jason, I would advise you to do is look for ways to enlarge your circle of support. Don't have a support person, have a support network. Build a list of 3, 4, 5 people that you call, sometimes people that you can lean on before you lean on them. Having one person that is your only fail-safe between success and failure is a bad strategy for long-term trauma healing. You need a network of people, not a single person. And that goes for every single person listening. Again, if you're struggling with compassion fatigue or burnout, there's a good chance that maybe you don't know what your boundaries are or you haven't communicated them. On the flip side, if you're a person who's gone through trauma and you're feeling like people aren't willing to sacrifice or they're oblivious, there's a good chance maybe you don't know what you need and you haven't been able to clearly articulate that to the others. And ask them, invite them, are you able to help me with that? And then accept their answer. And that's going to create so much more peace. It's going to do that. It's going to set you up for success instead of a loss. And that's what we want. So here's our final thought for the day as we kind of close out this episode of the Reboot Recovery Show. As a trauma sufferer, it's our responsibility to communicate with others what we need to feel safe and supported. So I hope that that's been helpful for you, Jason. I hope that if you're listening and maybe you've dealt with the same kind of thing, that's been helpful to you. Again, this is a show that's generated by questions that you ask. So please find us on info@Reboot Recovery, find Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all those things at Reboot Recovery. We are so grateful for your time today, for both of you guys as my co-hosts and as well as you listening. Next week, we're going to be talking about the impact childhood trauma has on us as adults. It's a deep topic. It's going to be a good conversation that I know you're going to want to make sure not to miss. So remember to keep moving forward as we overcome trauma together. I'm Evan Owens, and this is the Reboot Recovery Show. God bless.